Good morning, all. I hope you can hear us all right using Zoom technology as usual. I'm John McIntyre in Atlanta, Georgia, with the Center for International Business Education and Research of the Georgia Institute of Technology at the Scheller College of Business in Midtown Atlanta. We are delighted today to welcome our guest speaker, known to many of you in the United States and elsewhere, and I will be introducing him, he will be speaking for about 50 minutes, and then this will be followed by 20 minutes of moderated, curated questions and answers. Be sure you insert your questions in the chat box so that my colleague James Hoadley can aggregate them and pass them on to Shaomin. First of all, let me thank our co-sponsors. First, the China Research Center in Georgia, headed by my colleague Anchao Lu. Thank you. Secondly, I'd like to mention our colleagues at the Atlanta Council on International Relations, ACIR. Thank you for being a co-sponsor and for being interested in the topic. It's a topic you have followed, your membership has followed very closely over the years. And then finally, our colleagues at the Strong College of Business at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. Thank you very much for our co-sponsors. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Shaomin Li, who has been a professor of business and management, as well as an eminent scholar at the Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. His research is well known to those of us in academia, but also outside of academia. He has published in the Journal of International Business Studies. You can read him in Harvard Business Review, once in a while in The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. He also has a book that many of us have on our shelves, Bribery, Corruption in Weak Institutional Environment. Today, he's here to talk to us about a book that has not been released, but will be released in coming weeks. And the title of this book, which will be published by Cambridge University Press, is The Rise of China, Inc., How the Chinese Communist Party Transformed China into a Giant Corporation. Clearly, the world has changed in the last 20, 30 years, and this reconfigured world economy is raising all sorts of challenges. We're delighted to have him today to help us understand, in his own unique way, how China has become one of the dominant economic actor in this reconfigured world economy. We look forward to learning from you, possibly challenging you at the end of your presentation. And again, our heartfelt thanks for taking the time to present ahead of the release of your book. Shaomin, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, John, for your great introduction. Also, my thanks to James hosting this talk, the host and the co-host. Thank you all. Also, I want to thank the audience for attending this talk. As John mentioned, my talk is based on my forthcoming book, in which I argue that China, its economy, society, under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, has evolved into a corporation. The conventional thinking about and terminology used to describe China's economy, such as a state-centered economy, is not accurate or even useful in helping us understand it or formulate policies or strategies dealing with China. John, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, okay, all right. Let me see if I can use the, if I can, oh, great, okay. As John mentioned, this is a very contentious topic, and studying China can be dangerous, not only professionally, but personally. A China seminar can be as is contentious and can be as bad as a session in US Congress. So, but I'm going to show you the reason for this contention is different perspectives clash on this issue. Okay, I will show you some a few perspectives. The first one is what I call a China-centered view. This view focuses on how can we help China to develop, to grow. So the center is on China. And by the way, I was a China-centric scholar. For instance, under this view, there's also within this field, people debate. For instance, Wei Yingzhang, a noted economist from Peking University, he holds this. He thinks China's development is primarily due to the market forces, the free market and private property rights. Opposite, there's Justin Lin, who is also a noted economist from Peking University. He attributes China's fast growth to a very able state. The state has big authority, can limit people's freedom, but that will help the market to grow. And he also argues state-owned property, state-owned enterprises also performs well under the state guidance and the powerful state industrial policy. And of course, there's the engagement view, which I will come back later. By the way, as I said, I was a China-centric scholar. I co-wrote a paper with Wei Yingzhang, and our paper's title is "The Road to Capitalism." As China grows and becomes a dominant force in the world, there's a new perspective emerging. The new perspective, which I called the other countries' centric perspective. Their concern is what is the effect of China's rise on my country? And now it is my concern. And what is the rise of China on the United States, for instance? Okay. Of course, there are people who hold positive views. There are people who hold negative views, okay, which I will go through. And the reason I presented is because when people have different perspectives, they really don't see eye to eye. They talk different things. They kind of compare apples with oranges. Okay. When we talk about China's development, we cannot really miss Deng Xiaoping, because Deng played the very instrumental role in formulating China's, the party's principles and strategies in development. I believe Deng made three most important contributions. The first one is to party's leadership. That is his principle. And the second one, the white cat, black cat, is his kind of being very practical, kind of an opportunistic approach. And whatever works, let's do it. Okay. And the third one is now is well known in the China research field. He said, hide our claws, build our strengths before we can challenge the U.S. So the implication of this is, we will challenge the U.S. or the existing world order under the U.S. Leadership when we're ready. So the conventional wisdom today is that the current leader, Xi Jinping, has abandoned Deng's principles and the strategies. And I argue that is not true. If you review all the three, Xi has been adhering to them all along, except he thinks now it's time to show the strengths. Okay. Another thing we need to review is an engagement view. The engagement view essentially, the engagement view is based on the history of democracy in Europe or England. that the emerging middle class is a major force to push for democracy. So they argue that let's engage with China, even though it's still under communist rule, because if the economy develops, there will be a middle class, and the middle class will demand democracy. Okay. Well, that didn't happen. There is a middle class, but the middle class is not in a position to challenge the party or even demand democracy. Now, my colleague and good friend Jie Chen, he studied the attitude of China's new emerging middle class, and he concluded that they really, even they truthfully do not really care or demand democracy. The reason is not that they don't care or they truly don't want democracy, is because their middle class status, their wealth, even their life are dependent on the party. The party has a total control over there from cradle to grave. So if you do not have this independence, unlike their counterpart in England 100 years ago, that the bourgeois class, the middle class, they're pretty much independent of the monarch, so they can really demand things. But that's not the case in China. So this is, people now are kind of have the consensus that's a failure of the engagement view. Examples of the CCP's control, there are many. For instance, to start a business, just to name a business, you cannot name a business with China so-and-so or Chinese or national. Those names are reserved by the state, for the state. Okay. That's why many Chinese people, they don't believe that US Air is a private company. How can a private company called the US? Perhaps the best example of the state control is this what is called 窗口指导 or guidance at windows. The Chinese stock market is more like an internal gambling house, in the sense that the state manipulates trading, not only regulate, but actually directs private brokerage firms. If the market is too hot, they will kind of order the private brokerage firms to sell. And if the market is too low, they will ask them to support the market by buying. And recently, there are many examples of state interference. The tech sector, China's tutoring sector, food delivery, entertainment, gaming, and housing. Okay. A good case is Ant Group. Ant Group is a spin-off of Alibaba, founded by Jack Ma, and as some of us know, Ant was about to have one of the largest IPO in Hong Kong and Shanghai, $34 billion. And right before the IPO, Jack Ma in the meeting criticized the party, criticized the regulators. Kind of after his speech, the IPO was called off by the state. So even in Chinese media, people think that Jack Ma can lose his fortune in the future. A similar case is Didi, a equivalent of Uber in China. And Didi listed in New York exchange in the US. There were rumors that the state was not happy about the Didi's listing, but however, Didi did not receive any formal documents from the government saying you cannot list. But after the listing, the government ordered Didi to stop receiving new subscribers, and also took the app off the shelf. So think about this. Now people criticizing the party like those are really self-damaging acts. Why should the government do that? But here's my China Inc. Perspective. Now, legally, the government cannot do those things because Jack Ma's speech and the IPOs of Ant or Didi, they are all legal under the Chinese law. But however, the law is just ink on paper. The CCP has a de facto power over whatever, all the companies. It's not the de jure power, but it's a de facto power. The problem with de facto power is people or firms may not know it, and they may not realize it. The only way to make the de facto power credible is to use it from time to time to show and to set examples. That's what the party is doing. So this is kind of the background for my argument that the party actually runs China like a giant corporation. And I'm going to build my case using economic and the business theories. The first perspective we look at this issue is firm versus business units. As we all know, a business unit is within the firm. So the business unit is not as independent and does not have many rights that an independent firm would have. For instance, they do not have the right. They will not have the right to profit, or to transfer, to sell it, or even to enforce, protect their own rights. They can. The manager of a business unit can use the property of the unit, but you cannot really do other things. And I want to build a case to show you that the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises in China, they're not really firms. They're just business units of this gigantic China Inc. or the party. Because if you look at what kind of rights and structure they have, they resemble business units, not independent firms. Another perspective to look at why China is like a big firm is to compare a country versus a firm. One way to do this comparison is to look at it from an individual's perspective. An individual in a country is a citizen. An individual in a firm is an employee. So what are the rights of citizens in the country? Well, you can choose wherever you want to live, and you can say mostly whatever you like to say to criticize the leader. And the authorities' power over citizens are rather limited by the law. Many rights are born with. Those are automatic. You don't have to ask for the rights. But as an employee of a firm, do you have the total authority to choose where to live? No. You have to live wherever you cannot really say, I want to live in China and work in the US. You cannot do that. But you may be under the permission. Can you criticize the CEO? Normally, no. You can criticize if you quit, but within the company, you cannot. So those are very kind of a self-explanatory. Now look at citizens in China. Their rights correspond to employees in a firm, not to a citizen in a democratic country. For example, not everyone can live in Beijing. Okay, if you don't have the permission, you can still kind of live in Beijing like a undocumented, like an illegal alien. You cannot send your children to school, and even if you want to find a job, you need many documents. The rights to that are automatic and universal for citizens, they're not there in China. So the case I want to build here is citizens in China are like employees of a firm. The last comparison I want to do is actually use the classic debate in the theory of the firm, which is a kind of a basic economic theory. Hierarchy in that theory refers to a system or an organization in which that people have to obey the authority of that group, that hierarchy. So that's a firm. You follow orders of the firm's leader. Where markets, by market we mean free market. There are many free economic agents in the market. They do not have to obey orders from each other. They just do voluntary economic exchange. Okay. So we always debate, as from a business perspective. If I run a business, if I have certain activities, do I do those activities in the market, meaning buy them from the market, or do I order my own employees to do it, meaning do it within the firm? Okay, so that's a market versus hierarchy debate. Let's say I'm a publisher. Should I run my own printing unit, namely printing my own publication? Well, that depends. If I publish one book every year, I don't have to own a printing press because that's very that's a headache. I have to find a lot of business for them when they don't print this one book for me. On the other hand, if I'm running a newspaper, I print on a daily basis. Not only that, I make changes at the last minute, and I have to stop the press because there's a big news. If I use a contractor, the contractor may not be happy, may not really follow my order. So I have to own, I have to internalize, put that printing press business into my firm. So that is a hierarchy. Yeah. I want you to pay attention to the benefit of the hierarchy as compared to the market. Number one, you have the authority. I have the authority to order my employees to do whatever I want them to do. I don't have to negotiate or pay, to have the market. Second, I have unified ownership. I own my editing office. I own my printing office. I own everything. So I tell them what to do. Coordination. Since I have the authority, I have the ownership, I can coordinate everything. And I want to show what China looks like. China looks like a hierarchy rather than market. There's one authority. The party is the authority we go to. We know it, and it's very clear. And the party actually have a unified ownership. It's de facto, but it's very effective. And the coordination. We all heard this China talk about its 举国体制, mobilizing or raising the whole country as a raising the country as a whole to use all the resources to achieve big things. So that's coordination. So the reason I use this is to show that China is actually a firm, a hierarchy. From an organizational perspective, what is the structure like? The parties is like the party is like the board, the top management team, and the government agencies, ministries. They're more like functional departments of a firm. For instance, there are evidence that the state, the police, the intelligence departments, they collect data for individual firms. And the party has a Ministry of United Front Works, and that ministry also is an outreaching organization, identifying opportunities, recruiting talents for business in China. And also the propaganda department is more like a PR department in a firm. The state-owned enterprises, they're more like business units. They have no independence. State-related firms, they have more independence, but they're more like subsidiaries. The party can support them strongly. For instance, Huawei on paper is a 100% privately owned firm, but Huawei is a state-related firm. The state put all this resource behind Huawei. There are private firms like Jack Ma's, Alibaba, or Didi. They are more like joint ventures in the sense that the party is a shadowy partner. It's a de facto partner, and it's actually a controlling partner. They can just veto whatever the firm wants to do. Foreign firms, they are more like franchisees. First of all, not every foreign firm can enter China. You have to be on good terms with the party, and when you enter, you realize that you're doing business is not a right. It's a privilege that party gives you. I like this picture because this picture kind of reflects the essence of China Inc. China Inc. as a firm, as I said, firm has three advantages: authority, ownership, coordination. From this picture, we know who the authority is, and the uniformity, the coordination. Workers dressed in one color, and the cadres, the officials dressed in another color. Look at their hand gestures; they're very much uniform. The relations with the state, the closer the relation, the less freedom you have, the more control the state has. At the same time, you have more privilege. So the state firms, they have very little freedom, but they have a lot privilege. And as we go down, foreign firms have the most freedom and the least privilege, but they all kind of under the whole structure of China Inc. You look at from a society perspective, a democratic country, we have governments, we have firms, we have individuals. They are all living or operating under the rule of law. The rule of law is the biggest set. They are subsets of this big set. And China is not like that. All the firms, individuals are included or under the government. And even the government is under the party. So that's how I view the structure of the whole society. And as Xi Jinping said it very clear, the party leads all. One of the major strategies of China Inc. is its industrial policy. China's industrial policy, a kind of a typical view is first, the party will identify some key industries that they want to develop and protect them from foreign competitions. And also the government will help the domestic players to access foreign markets and technologies. And then the government can give subsidy or mobilize all the resources, develop them. Once they're ready, they can go out to the world market, and they will become dominant players. So my point here is, it's not like an industrial policy of many other countries which are merely a guideline. But here, it's not a guideline. It's a corporate strategy. Under such a strategy, for instance, the EV battery industry, China started rather late, but now it's the #1 player in the world. It kind of dominate the world market for EV batteries. Just follow that kind of strategy. Solar panels. Again, China was a latecomer, but become a dominant player using the industrial policy. High-speed rail. China learned from Siemens, Alstom, and Alstom, and other foreign players, and they have to share their technology with Chinese player. There's only one Chinese player, CRIC. And now China has developed their own model, the Fuxing model. The Hexie model had many foreign parts, borrowed technologies, but the Fuxing is almost completely domestic Chinese-made technologies. Now CRIC has the lowest cost, largest scale, and it is a major player in many foreign countries in making train cars and train systems. Recently, the official newspaper Science and Technology reports that there are 35 what they call the kabo's, cutting throat, choking throat technologies that China has yet to have. So people anticipate that those may be the new directions for China's industrial policy. Okay. What are the advantages of this new term I'm trying to introduce? Okay. The key, I think the key is this flexibility. It is a state and it is a firm. So in state-to-state interaction in the world affairs, the Chinese state can act like a firm with fast reaction, agility. In firm-to-firm competition, Chinese firms can act like a state. Okay. Another key issue is it's de facto, it's not de jure. So it's not on paper. That gives us a lot of flexibility. Okay. Also, to the Chinese leader, you managing China, all the units in China as firms can avoid this ideological mobilization, political movements, the things that the Chinese Communist Party used to use during the Cultural Revolution. So it does not really cause a lot of instability in China. From the world perspective, if we understand China as a big corporation, that has several advantages. First, it's a more clear term with economic and business implications. Before this term, the term we have been using, for instance, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, she called China a state-centered economy. What does that mean? How do we deal with it? Well, if it's state-centered, maybe we should help China's private business to develop. That would be a wrong strategy to me. Okay, and that's why it is vague and confusing to call it state-centered. Okay. So this one, China Inc. is more precise. Also, the structure, the function, the role of a firm, a company, they are very familiar with people who are educated in a free market economy. We know what it is. We know what a subsidiary is. We know what a franchisee is. We know what a joint venture is. And also, it is very useful to describe the behaviors in China. For instance, there's a Jack Ma and IPO incidents. After that, Jack Ma actually reportedly offered his shares to the party, and the party declined. Why should the party decline this good opportunity to own Ant or to own Alibaba? Well, based on my China Inc. Theory, it's not necessary. The party is already the de facto owner. It's a majority controlling owner, partner of all the business in China. Why does the party need a de jure ownership? So how powerful is China Inc.? Here is a look at it's a big country, we know that, and the GDP wise, based on purchasing power, China is already bigger than the US. But I want you to pay attention to this: the percent of GDP controlled by the central government. This is not a kind of my estimate. This is the calculation based on China's own statistical yearbook. So essentially, China owns more than the Chinese Communist Party owns more than half of China's economic activities. Very powerful. So visualize this new world market, the global marketplace with China Inc. I use squares to represent country governments and circles to represent firms. So what is the role of a government, national governments in world market? Well, they're the rule setters in their own country. And they also negotiate, collectively, they negotiate rules for the world, such as the WTO. And they are judges, they're not players in the economy. So they're the rule setter and the judges. Of course, they're all biased towards their own company, no question about that. But their bias is also to a limit, because after all, they have to follow the rule of law they set up. And China is a hybrid. It's a hybrid of a state and a firm. So I use a octagon to represent it. And it's very powerful. It's big in the world market. Imagine they are the play. The octagon is a player, not only a biased judge, but an actual player. How can they play or compete with this? It's just they don't really follow the rules, existing rules. They're not a state, they're not a firm, they're a combination. So that's why I think this concept is important. Catherine Tai should tell China, well, you cannot be an octagon. You have to. The state has to be a square. The firms has to be circles. Well, the CCP or China Inc. Is not. It's not that they don't have challenges. They have their own challenge. There's a dilemma. The dilemma is for China Inc. to thrive, keeping the door open is vital, because you need to trade, you need technologies, so on and so forth. But on the other hand, the CCP rather has its door closed, because there are bats. There are new thoughts of freedom. People learn from other countries, and those can pose a challenge to the party. So what are the options for the party dealing, to keep the bads out or to just keep the good part? One option is to keep the status quo. Keeping status quo has a problem, because Chinese people, when they travel abroad, they learn new ideas. They're constantly asking the party, why can't we have this? Another option is, well, let's embrace democracy. Change China to become part of this democratic world. But as we know, the party is not going to do it. So another option is, well, change the world. Change the world so they will criticize us less. There are evidence that this is the route, this is the direction that the party is going. As Trade Ambassador Catherine Tai in her recent speech said, Beijing has doubled down on its system, and it is increasingly clear, those are her words, that China is not going to change. So the questions to the democracies is, if we don't really like a octagon in the game of squares and circles, what can we do to make China change back to a square and a big square that's government and many small circles? China has a higher growth rate than most of mature economies than the world as average. So with time, China is going to be bigger and bigger. So the octagon we saw will be bigger and bigger. So that's a challenge we face if we don't really do something. That's China is going to be the dominant player. But the democracies, there's a question, China versus them, who needs whom more, right? And this is a question, to put it simply, there are 4 combinations. The democracies can keep trading between themselves, or the dictatorships like China, North Korea, they can trade among themselves. Or like the current system, democracies and dictatorships trade with each other. The last one is, what if a dictatorship closes its door? Now, democracies, when they trade each other, they benefit, mutually benefit. Well, dictatorships, they don't really trade, they usually fight. This is the current situation between China and the democracies. China can take the full advantage of democracies, openness and fairness and the rule of law. What if a dictatorship closes its door? Well, just like what happened during the Cultural Revolution and the many political movements in China, if China is closed, there will be an infight. So the conclusion is, to me, is clear. China needs democracies more than vice versa. Okay. Of course, the question is, China right now practices is a divide and conquer strategy dealing with each democracy. So the implication of this is democracies has to unite. Should they ask China to change? What are the costs and the benefit of doing so? Okay. If the democracies choose not to ask China to change, China will eventually become a dominant player because it has a higher growth rate. So it's not in the best interest. If the democracies ask China to make a change, that can be costly because the Communist Party will certainly retaliate. Okay. And will China change? Well, if China changes to change into a democracy and with rule of law, that's beneficial to everybody, including China. But however, that is ultimately up to the Chinese people. If not, there's a possibility that China will become more isolated. And as we just showed, isolation is will encourage infights in China. That's not good. And the party clearly realized it. So it's possible that isolation may push China to completely change. Finally, another cost-benefit analysis just for the US. This is a very simple qualitative analysis. Okay. Three scenarios of China for the US. China keeps status quo, or China become more isolated, like a decoupling, or China become more rule-based. For each sectors of the US, I assign a value. If the change is a positive change for the US, I assign number 2. Otherwise, if it's negative, I give negative number 2. If mutual, I give 0. As you can see, the 3 scenarios, the best scenario is if China make meaningful change, structural change towards rule-based. And the worst, even a more isolated China is better than the current status. Okay. I'm going to stop here and turn the floor to the host. Thank you for my presentation.
Thank you. I
John.
believe John, as the moderator, has some questions.
John's speaker is not turned on. John, your speaker is not on. James, you may need to turn John's. You need it.
Thank you, Jim, for unmuting me. Thank you, Shaomin, for a very insightful presentation, looking at options that the West, so-called, faces in dealing with China, and the challenges, internal challenges China faces as it adjusts itself to an increasing reliance on the world economy as an engine of growth. I have a question going back to the current US trade representative, Catherine Tai, and you quoted her as saying that the US better realize that things are unlikely to change in China, and her solution is to turn to a process of targeted exclusion tariffs, in as much as it does not harm US commercial interest. Is this a possible line of action that's credible for the United States? On the one hand, resort to the traditional measures of trade exclusion of Chinese products by way of sanctions under various existing laws and new ones, possibly, while at the same time not harming US economic interest as a result of those tariffs. What do you think about that?
Very good question, John. Although I have been thinking about this issue, I must say I have not done in-depth research on this. Here's what I'm thinking. I think you mentioned this key phrase: not harming US consumer or US industry. Essentially, to me, that is we want to have the cake and eat it. Now, there's a long-term pain or short-term pain. No one wants long-term pain. That is probably a consensus. But we want to resolve the long-term pain without any short-term pain. How could that be possible? But we're a democracy. If there's a short-term pain, the current administration will lose their election. That is the kind of a fatal flaw of democracy as we have it in the globalization with a huge player that does not follow rules. This huge player, the octagon, can influence any domestic politics in any democracies. So I would have to, if I were to formulate the policy, I have to take some short-term pain. Otherwise, it won't work.
So the US tried talking, the US and the Europeans and others tried litigating. Nothing worked, maybe. Is it time for a new and tougher approach? Is that what you're telling us?
I think I see the new trend, some new trend that is encouraging. That is, we have to build a kind of united front. It's very easy to use some kind of a game theory to map this out. If if we just individually dealing with China, that is not going to work. I mean, we have to have a coalition of like-minded countries to take concerted measures to deal with China.
And would you say generally that the 27 cases the United States brought up against China in the World Trade Organization in Geneva have resulted in satisfactory settlements for the United States and other parties to the litigation?
Okay, good question. I am not. I have not followed each individual cases. Of course, I think the WTO is a very useful, very good world agency. But as we all know, in terms of each country's influence in all those world agencies, it's not kind of a fair and equal, because any country can bribe other countries to support it. I'll give you a fact. There are 15 agencies under the UN system, including the WTO and others. Of the 15, actually, China controls 4. I shouldn't say China controls 4. There are 4 agencies that are headed by Chinese. One of them is this Interpol. Interpol's head was jailed by China. Otherwise, it would be 4. Now there's 3, let's say. No country has 3. Not even the US, or not even a continent will have that many. I mean, there are a lot of evidence how China achieved that by canceling debts, by a lot of economic goodies and some coercion. There are reports that in those votings for the heads, China delegate will have, U.S. has 15% delegate, China has over 100 people delegate. They take pictures how people vote. So my question is that those international agencies are pretty much toothless, not very effective.
So you're telling us that China is using Chinese internal behavior patterns and rules, CCP-inspired rules, to address international organizations.
Exactly. That is a very good way to put it. That is why my worry about this China Inc. As I said, my perspective is from the U.S. perspective, maybe from international existing rules perspective.
There has been a lot of disagreements among the NATO allies in a geostrategic context, but looking at it purely from an economic, trade, investment, and intellectual property point of view, does China have a grand strategy in addressing the US and the European Union, and I guess the UK, which you can lump into the EU even though it's out of it? Is it seeking to divide in order to reign, to rule? Or is there an implicit strategy, do you think, on the part of the Chinese governing elites?
Well, so far we have seen that China try not to deal with the EU as an entity, collectively. China rather like to deal with each individual European countries.
Yes.
Now that tells me, yes, there is at least implicitly a strategy like that. But you also mentioned intellectual property rights or innovation. I don't know. I just want to share a few.
Yeah.
As we know, innovation or R&D, especially basic science, they are very costly. Also, they require diversity. They require freedom. So in that regard, China does not have an advantage. But however, once a innovation, a technology or science is already well established, China can acquire it, either legally or illegally. And China can implement it in a faster pace, larger scale than any other country in the world. That is what I call standardization. We had the advantage of diversity. China has the advantage of uniformity and standardization.
And finally, last questions as moderator that I want to raise. I think you really have turned the page on the core argument of the Clinton administration in the 1990s, the globalization argument that eventually China will change, that the state-centric model, which you described early in your remarks, can be adjusted and adapted. You have indicated, I believe, that this is unlikely to be the case and that it's an unrealistic approach in addressing China in international negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. I agree, because the globalization we have now is very much voluntary and a gentleman agreement. It's based on British democracy. It's very much a gentleman's agreement. You cannot have a player who constantly violating the rules without much of a consequences, because you cannot really have a very much a tit-for-tat approach to punish the rule violators. You're very lenient or even unable to punish, right? So if China's model should not be, or maybe cannot be sustained if the world objects, or in other words, China's model can sustain for a long time. I mean, do the Chinese people like this, the current political system? I cannot answer that, but I suspect many people don't. Many people probably like a more democratic system. But in the current Chinese system, it's an open system. The world trade will kind of sustain this system. Let's say the Chinese society, China Inc. overall earns $10 from trade, and the party keeps $9 and give $1 to the people. It's still a positive sum game for the Chinese people. As long as the world allow and enable this model can sustain for a long time. However, if China is closed, this model will become an infight, will degenerate into an infight that cannot be sustained. That's why China is very clear. They're against decoupling. They're against any kind of saying that, the church.
Knowing that US and European negotiators, knowing that China does not want to decouple because it might lead to infighting and internal destabilization, isn't there enough leeway to negotiate a change of behavior by the Chinese and make China conform more to the rules of the WTO? Isn't that what the US should be doing right now, in the knowledge that decoupling is not wanted by China?
I agree. I think that this is, but remember, we just talked about this. We want to do it without any pain. That is not possible.
Yes.
That is just impossible.
On that cheerful thought, as moderator, I'm going to turn it over to our friend James Hoadley, who is moderating and curating the questions from the audience. Jim, the floor is yours. We have about 15 minutes.
Okay. So the first question is from Han Chao Lu. In the 1980s, when Japanese economy was rising, there were a number of books, both popular and academic, titled Japan Inc. Do you think there are some similarities between the Chinese economy today and the so-called Japanese economic miracle of the 1980s? At the time, Americans worried that Japan Inc. would turn into Japan as number one, as the late Harvard professor Ezra Vogel suggested. Are there similar worries about the perspective of China Inc. today?
Very good question. I wrote recently. I just wrote a paper on China's industrial policy. In that paper, we compared Japan Inc. versus China Inc. The paper is forthcoming from the European Journal of International Management. I'm trying to recall what we did in the final table. And the key difference, well, let me say there are many similarities between Japan's state industrial policy and China's state industrial policy. In Japan's case, they identified key industries to develop, and interestingly, some of their strategies failed miserably. That's why, for instance, they view liquid displayer as a key, but they were behind in computing, whatever. But there's a key difference. Even in Japan, such a powerful government, MITI, we know MITI is the powerful agency that regulates industry and the economy. It is a guideline. The firms don't have to follow. I don't think that's the case in China. I cannot imagine any firm that can defy the government's order, even a hint. So, and also in Japan, state ownership is not as expensive, as pervasive and as in China. And even in Japan, after all, is still a country of rule of law. There's a clear limit between the state and the firms, even state-owned firms. But in China, there's no such line.
I'm not sure that Carlos Ghosn would agree with your last statement there, but that's a different topic for another day. Let's move on to the next question. From an anonymous attendee asking, why do you think China allows so many students to come to the US to study? They learn new techniques, but China may lose control.
Good question. I think I myself is a good example. Let me put it this way. In the late 70s, early 80s, that's when I came. There was no question for any Chinese students. If you, I would say any, but probably more than 90% of college grads, if they were given a opportunity to come to the US, they will come. And then this huge cohort of Chinese from that time, in a way, we embrace democracy or freedom here and many states. That was a problem for China. That's called a brain drain. But now the things is not like that. Many Chinese students here, they are a lot more nationalistic and they are more supportive to the party's policy. And back then there was no freedom to choose. Now in China, many people do have the freedom to leave China. Unless you're on the blacklist, people can manage to leave. It's a choice. But it seems that many Chinese do enjoy this China as a octagon. Namely, I come here, but in China I can make more money. Maybe I enjoy certain things, and I have the freedom. But eventually I don't want to uproot from China to migrate. No one wants to uproot to migrate unless necessary. It's a painful decision.
Right. From our friend Marin Marinov, who is joining us from Denmark right now. Is the role of the CCP of China Inc. sustainable? And if yes, what are the reasons?
Okay. We kind of touched that, but it may not be clear. As I said, if China is closed, it's not sustainable. It's not. If China is open, namely, if the outside world keeps supplying China Inc. with goods, with technology, with money, with exchange of scholarship and everything, yes, that is sustainable.
Okay, a little bit out of turn here. Certain people get preferential treatment. Please use the Q&A tool. But for the great Jag Sheth, I will take a question out of chat. How will the rise of India impact the balance of power between China and the United States?
That's a very good question. India, in almost every aspect, is the opposite of China Inc. That's why China Inc. is a concern. India is totally decentralized, and the government cannot act like a firm. So, and also we talk about diversity versus standardization earlier. China enjoys this standardization, mobilizing the whole country. Indian does not have that. I don't really, and this over diversity to me. I mean, this is away from politics, from any for instance, we do need a common language to work to communicate effectively if we work on an issue. And Indian is highly diversified, many languages, and so that really, to me, hurt India as a rising world power. Collectively, individually, Indian citizens enjoy a lot more rights. And there are many thriving Indian firms, but they don't have the collective size of that huge octagon I showed you.
Okay, next we have more of a comment, but I will turn it into a question. Concerning the negotiated settlement between the CCP and the Chinese people on gains from trade, this is from Christine Reese. I would think that innovation and events that cause discontinuity, COVID, et cetera, would force a renegotiation between the party and the people in this, and this in itself would generate disruption. Do you agree or disagree with that assessment?
I wish I can clarify. Within China or in the world, when she said disagreements between the parties?
It says disagreement between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people on gains from trade. So I think it's domestic.
Okay, good question. I think the party blundered at the beginning when the virus broke up. We all know that. But look at today. I must say, with this leverage, the low human rights, high technology, and the huge resource, the party has been handling anything in China rather smoothly and successfully. Anyone who dissent will be in jail, will disappear. And that is a very strong message. I can name quite a few. This in my slides I showed this Ren Zhiqiang. He criticized Xi Jinping, kind of not even directly. He implied Xi Jinping is a naked emperor. He got 18 years. And this newly released Chen Qiushi, a self-made reporter, went to Wuhan to look at the virus. He disappeared for many months, and then reappeared. He said, "Think about this. My parents are hostage. I think about them, so I have to do whatever the party asks me to do and get out." It's anyone who challenged the party, not only that you cannot find a job, you cannot even find an apartment to rent, you cannot even send your kids to school. This is a total incorporated place. Everything belongs to this huge corporation. I don't see any negotiation power from the people with the party. That's the very theme of my book. When you have everything depend on the party, how can you negotiate? What's your bargaining power?
All right, we have another person invoking privilege, our good friend Cedric Suzman writes, Japan Inc. was not sustainable because it couldn't support creative innovation in competition with the US system. China seems to be more successful in this respect. Can you comment on China's innovation capability?
I think it's still an open question. I don't think that the verdict is in. Well, first of all, there are different type of innovations, right? They're what we call the 0 to 1 innovation, meaning from nothing to a entirely new idea or new thing. And then there are incremental innovations. Now, Japan is very good at incremental innovation. That is sustainable. I mean, to what extent we say Japan Inc. failed? It's just an aging economy. It no longer become fat, keep the rapid growing. And the US someday will become that too. Do we say US failed? China is very good at applications, adopting new technologies and use it. As to the question whether China will become a fundamental, original creator, innovator, I still have a big question mark, because that indeed needs a freedom of thought, diversity, and China do not really, not only do not value it, it's just that the social structure and the culture cannot really support that. On top of that, we have this political uniformity, which make it worse.
Yeah, Japan is my area of specialty, so I would attack the question from a different way, but we got to keep moving because this is your presentation. So we have a question from Viviana Montenegro. The question is, what role does Russia play in China's success?
Good question. I think at least in the US, we overstated the role of Russia, especially in comparison to China. Let me quote this National Intelligence Agency's senior officials quote. He said, in terms of spying or influencing the US, Russia is like a hurricane, come and go. And China is climate change, slow, large scale, consistent. That's the difference. Look at the economy. Russia's economy is, I think, 1/6 of China's. Russia's population is smaller than the US. I mean, for every Russian spy they send here, China can send, maybe 10 in population-wise. And Russians, but most important of all, Russia is not, the Russian political system is not a dictatorship. It's not a one-party rule. Russian system is what I call the infant democracy. It's an early stage of democracy. In Russia, there are 4 parties. Number 1 is, I think, called United Russia. Number 2 is a Communist Party, sizable. So, and remember the 3 girls, I think it's a music band. They were jailed. They called the Pussycat. And when they then a judge defied Putin and released one. Can that happen in China? No. And in every aspect, Russia's threat is categorically not comparable to China's. But why in this country we always think Russia is? Remember before President Biden, candidate Biden said Russia is a threat, China is a competitor. That was totally wrong. I mean, without any political citing, that comment is wrong. That was what to me is a general impression. Russian is much more powerful. It's not. Russia may have more nuclear warheads, but China will catch up pretty soon, if that's the case. So if Putin is gone, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, right now it's a strong man, very popular strong man hijacking the system, the infant, fragile democratic system. Look, if people who travel to China and Russia, I was a visiting scholar at the Moscow School of Management. Let me tell you this: in Red Square, as in China's Tiananmen Square, in Red Square, people stand there, gave a speech, whatever speech, criticizing Putin, no problem. Impersonating Putin, get the pictures taken, no problem. Do it in China. Before you do it, 100 plainclothes police will whisk you away in a split of a second. That's the difference.
Well, these are fascinating, and would love to talk all day long on this, but we are running short on time. So I'm going to go to the last question. Is from Dong Cheng. It's a long one though. Can you compare Trump and Biden's China policies, and which is more effective in your opinion?
This is a good but a long question. Also maybe partisan. Let me try to be as objective as possible. Remember my perspective is, how can we protect our democracy from China? Okay, our way of, or the world market order from China. And we have to give credit to Trump, who kind of brought this issue eventually. Before for a long time, it's like US say, hey, you violated this. Can you make a change? China, oh, I'm sorry. I guarantee you I will make a change. And then later on, US will say, did you make the change? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. So it goes back and forth, and nothing happens until Trump said, okay, the only thing I can do is to have a trade war, have this a tariff. Then China did pay attention, pay close attention, and even made concessions. So in that way, it worked to a point. And in many ways, the Biden administration kind of continued this, but I don't quite understand some keywords from Catherine Tai, which is viewed very kind of hawkish on China. She said recoupling. Why do we say that? What do you mean recoupling? And China played that recoupling with a big letterhead. You know, U.S. admitted that they need recouple. Again, I think that, but I do like this new coalition between US, UK, and Australia. That sends a very good, clear message. We need to get into and I think one thing Trump did wrong is to kind of do not build a coalition with Europe, the broadest alliance, to ask China to change. Rather, Trump is attacking the EU, Canada, everybody. But now we have to build a coalition because that's the only way. I think Biden is doing that. I give credit to that effort. No, Trump left TTP. We should get into the new TTP. What's it called? The PCTTP, the Pacific Trade Alliance.
All right. Well, we still have some more wonderful questions in the queue, but we've run out of time. So I think I will turn it over to John McIntyre to close us out.
Thank you very much, Jim. Very good job. Thank you, Shaomin, for handling some tough head-on questions, partisan or not. We appreciate your presentation. We look forward to the release of your book by Cambridge University Press, and we express our thanks as well as our thanks to our co-sponsor today, ACIR China Research Center, and your own university, Old Dominion at Norfolk, Virginia. Thank you very much. Wishing you a good lunch and a good week. Again, thank you and goodbye.